Happy Monday and welcome to another episode of Ask Ira Live. I'm EmmaKate Austin here with Ira back in the studio. Happy to have you back from Milwaukee. So a lot to talk about. Some breaking news really off the top here. The Heat just announced that Tyler Johnson and Goran Dragic not playing tonight in Houston.
Yeah, the Heat are going to be shorthanded going to this game. They're playing the Rockets at the Toyota Center. As you know, the last game out against Charlotte didn't have Goran, didn't have Tyler, still found a way. They started Wayne Ellington. Eric Spoelstra said his preference not to start Wayne, to play him as a sixth man. If you look back in the game, that worked out pretty well starting him. And Derrick Jones Jr. still on this two-way contract, not even a full NBA contract. He literally is on a day rate. He is getting paid $5,000 every day that he gets to play for the Heat. Today, his $5,000 will probably come again with his starting role. But the one thing I learned after Charlotte and after that miraculous comeback is don't count this team out no matter what the lineup is. So tonight against the Houston Rockets, the Heat are going to go out there with replacement shooting guard, replacement point guard, against Chris Paul and James Harden. It doesn't get tougher than that.
I know, that's going to be a tough duo to go up against. Do we have any idea of how long these guys are expected out? I mean,
I think this is still short term because, again, it was interesting. Sunday, the injury report came out. They were upgraded from doubtful to questionable. So I thought, okay, a chance in Houston. I think the Heat are looking at it this way. After the Monday game against Houston, they're off Tuesday, they're off Wednesday, return to American Airlines Arena Thursday against Sacramento. So I think it makes sense for them is, hey, one more game off means 3 more full days off. They'll be ready, they'll be healthy. The Heat have played so few home games. They need to get the Thursday game against Sacramento. They need to get their Saturday game against Charlotte. So I think the thought is, let's give them the extra time. No matter who they throw out against Houston, it's going to be a challenge. The Rockets are coming off a victory against the Warriors, nationally televised on Saturday.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough one for sure. But again, it's always next man up for this team, it seems like. But let's go back to that game in Charlotte.
Yeah.
What happened there?
It's worth repeating. Again, it's interesting. You and I, we do these Heat 30-year reviews, the biggest shot, the biggest plays. You and I have spoken a bunch about Ray Allen and that shot against Game 6, the Spurs, he'd win the championship. You know what? When I look back at what happened in Charlotte, I think that's a greater comeback, not in terms of meaning. You're talking about a team with about 30 seconds to go being down 5 points. Heat calls timeout, James Johnson dunks. The Charlotte throws the ball inbounds. Literally, Josh Richardson rips the ball out of Nicholas Batum's hands, throws it back out to James Johnson. He hits a 3, we're tied. The Heat get 2 stops against Kemba Walker, potential all-star, and all of a sudden, Kelly Olynyk is dribbling down the court, clearly losing the ball, 0.2 of a second, and the referees call the whistle. You know what, EmmaKate? When things turn in your direction and good things start happening, that's the kind of thing you see. I still can't believe what happened in that game. And I'm going to be honest to everyone out there. I had a complete story written about how the Heat lost. So when you read this story in Sunday's paper, please keep in mind, I wrote that story in about 30 seconds.
I mean, who would have thought the game-winning point would have been a free throw by Kelly Olynyk?
Kelly Olynyk while losing the ball out of bounds. Yeah.
Exactly. All right, now let's go to our hot take of the week. So the Heat right now, they are 27-19. They are 4th in the Eastern Conference, 1 game ahead of Washington. But really, where do these guys stand in the Eastern Conference? Is 4th place an accurate representation of where they are, where they're going to be?
I think it's still early. I think the teams that are playing to win, when you look at their approach, these are the dog days. NBA players generally will tell you, between the Christmas holiday break and All-Star weekend, it's the dog days. You know you're going to the playoffs when you're an elite team. It's just where you want to sort of steel yourself for that second half of the season. But when you look at the standings, and we could pull up this first graphic here, to me there still are 3 elite teams in the Eastern Conference. No matter what order they are, we know Cleveland is down. The Heat are within half a game right now of the Cavaliers. These are the 3 best teams. To me, they're a tier unto themselves. I don't know what order. I don't know who gets number 1, number 2, or number 3. But to say what the Heat have right now, EmmaKate, I don't think I would put them in these teams' class, even though the Heat, as we speak, are within half a game of the Cavaliers.
So the Cavaliers, they've been pretty uneven lately. They have they have 2 wins in their last 8 games.
Yeah.
And those 2 wins came against the Magic, and they were pretty close games. So, I mean, the Cavaliers have arguably one of the best players in the NBA, but are they still elite?
Yeah, the thing is, people ask me about this, and we look at LeBron James here. When someone has made the NBA Finals the last 7 years, I'm not betting against them. So what I tell people is this. If you were to ask most NBA insiders, you could either pick the Cavaliers or every other team in the Eastern Conference to make the Eastern Conference Finals. a lot of people are still going with the Cavs. And it's like a lot of people have said on Twitter. LeBron James is the kind of player that you so don't doubt that if the Cavaliers are down 3-0 in a first-round series, down 40 points entering the fourth quarter, I'm not so sure some people still aren't going to say the old saw of, well, they have LeBron James, they'll be fine. So that's the thing. Until the Kings' reign is over, until someone else takes over, he's not abdicating. He will find a way. Keep an eye out on the Cleveland Cavaliers when we get to the NBA trading deadline. All these old bodies, they might get some new blood, some young blood in there, talking possibly about DeAndre Jordan from the Clippers, possibly talking about George Hill, getting another point guard. So I think that's a team we still have to wait on. I'm not doubting LeBron James at all.
Yeah, I wouldn't count him out. Out of all the players in the NBA,
I'm
he's
safe
a good
there.
one to stick with.
Then I think there's another tier. I think there's tier 2, and this is where I have the Heat. And if we look at this graphic right here, I have it down as a 3-team race. Some other people I spoke to said, hey, maybe you throw Detroit in there. We saw the Heat last week go into Milwaukee after beating the Bucks at home, getting a couple of victories. The Heat have already beaten the Washington Wizards. Talent-wise, you can make an argument that the Bucks, with your favorite name, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and the Wizards with Bradley Beal and John Wall have more. But you know what? The difference is there are no dog days for the Heat during the regular season. That where these other teams might say, okay, we're going to get a playoff seed, we'll be somewhere. I think the Heat are absolutely going to grind through the entire schedule. So I think when you look at it right there, I think I would have the Heat at least in this 3. And it'll be interesting because remember, number 4 is home seed, home court in the first round of the playoffs.
So have the Bucks and Wizards underachieved or have the Heat overachieved?
You know, this is, again, it's half empty, it's half full. You look here at some of the photos of the Heat against the Bucks. I think those teams have underachieved simply from the talent level. The Bucks will have, we know, at least one All-Star in Giannis Antetokounmpo. Mm-hmm. We know that the Wizards most likely will get at least one, either Bradley Beal or John Wall, quite possibly have 2. We'll talk about this later in the show. I'm not so sure that the Heat will have an All-Star. I mean, you see some of the players the Heat are throwing out there. God bless Derrick Jones Jr., Derek Walton Jr. Yes, he actually plays for the Miami Heat. And you see the stars of Chris Middleton or someone like that in Milwaukee. Yeah, I think the Heat are overachieving, but don't ever tell them they're overachieving. Because when I stood there next to them in that game in Charlotte in the locker room, they said there's no smoke and mirrors here. This is real. This is who we are. So they're not as talented. Don't tell them that. And don't ever tell them that they can't win. So I think I have that group sort of as a middle 3 group. And then it gets interesting. And I always do this sort of EmmaKate reverse math. I just want to know if a team's going to make the playoffs or not. There were 15 teams in each conference. So if I can define 7 who aren't making the playoffs, then you know the other 8 are there somewhere. So we gave you right now, we went ahead, gave you 6 teams there. So 2 of these next 4 teams on my list, in my theory, my view, won't make the playoffs. But if more than 2 do, then all of a sudden a team like the Heat could wind up with an extra challenge. The Hornets, obviously the bad loss on Saturday. The Heat will see them again this Saturday at American Airlines Arena. I like the Sixers. Joel Embiid, I mean, he is everything and more. Ben Simmons can't shoot, and yet he is thriving with the Sixers. I think they're on the uptick. The Pacers last night on Sunday go into San Antonio. Now, Kawhi Leonard's out for the Spurs, but they still get a win there. And Detroit has been the streakiest team in the playoff race. At times you look up, hey, the Pistons, Stan Van Gundy, they're number 4. Other times, like now, you look and you see they're not in the playoffs. So to me, it's really a matter of with the Pistons, do they end on an uptick or a downswing? But I think this is the group that if more than 2 of these teams make the playoffs, then I think the Heat could have more of a fight just to make the playoffs. Yeah,
I was going to say, could a team in that group potentially push the Heat out of the playoffs? I mean, like you said, the 76ers have a lot of scale with Embiid and Simmons, so was that possible?
And here's really interesting. The Heat play 4 games against the 76ers, and they're all coming up in a 1-month span. It's interesting. The series against Charlotte ends this coming Saturday. The Heat's up 3-0, feeling good. The Heat go into Detroit in a week. So these head-to-head games, Eric Spoelstra always says, these games are the ones that count double. So they're going to have 4 double-up games coming up against Philadelphia. Another game against Detroit in Detroit. They have that Charlotte game coming up on Saturday. They go back to Indiana relatively soon. Those games count double. When we look at that mini subset of the Heat against the Challengers, I think that'll let us know, will the Heat have to play every game to the finish just to make the playoffs? Or maybe they'll give themselves some breathing room. Those games are key.
Definitely. All right, and now let's move to the bottom.
And then it's a question of, will there be another team who might come up and shock the world? And I know, we have a lot of New Yorkers down here, New Yorkers, and they think their Knicks were going places. You saw the game on Sunday against the Lakers, maybe not. Brooklyn, look, they can beat anyone. They beat the Heat at home, came back from 16 down in the second half. They went to Detroit on Sunday and won. Chicago playing much better ball, but they dug themselves such a hole. I think of these teams, you know what you're going to see from these 5 teams right here are upsets along the way. I don't think Eric Spoelstra will tell you this. There's ever an easy night in the NBA. But I think when you look at this group of 5 teams, these are going to be the ones you can't slip. You can't say, oh, it's only the Knicks, only the Nets, only the Bulls. These are games you're going to have to push a little harder for. These teams are out, but these teams still will create their own problems. And then except for the Nets, whose first-round pick now belongs to the Cavaliers, we'll probably see all these teams in the lottery.
So do any of these teams have one big push left like the Heat did last year when they rebounded from 11-30? I mean, they all pretty much have better records than that now.
And that's really interesting because I see so many players on those teams, EmmaKate, pointing to the Heat. Well, the Heat did it last year. They were 11-30 midseason. They got to 41-41, lost in a tiebreaker. Interestingly, Tim Hardaway Jr., the son, of course, the former great Heat guard Tim Hardaway, he says, we can be like Miami. I mentioned that in my Sunday column at sunsentinel.com. They did it last year. We can do it this year. EmmaKate, I think what this shows is how unique last season's Heat team was to do that. And I think all these teams trying to emulate and copy that formula are going to find out how rare it is and how difficult it is. But yes, the Heat are going to stand for motivation until those teams are basically have that little X eliminated from the playoffs next to them in the standings.
Definitely. I mean, if they can give them a little inspiration, why not? It's always
sure.
Good to push for something. All right, let's move into some of your questions from our mailbag. And remember to keep submitting your questions throughout the show. We're going to get to some more at the end.
We promise.
We will. Yeah, I'm checking right here. All right, let's start with Carl, who asks, Ira, will Goran Dragic make the All-Star game? The NBA always pushes its international players.
Yeah, you know, I don't know if it's an international push with Goran. I think it's a push for this. In the last 25 years, any team that has been in the top 4 of the Eastern Conference at the time of the All-Star game has had at least one All-Star. It's been 25 years since that didn't happen. That was still when the Nets were in New Jersey. So you would think coaches who are now voting for the 7 reserves would say, hey, they're a winning team. We respect winning more than anything. But you know what really hurts right now? This weekend is when the coaches are voting. They have to vote for at least 2 guards, at least 3 front court players, and 2 wild cards. The problem here is this. Goran Dragic is out of sight. He's out of view. They haven't seen him. He wasn't part of that victory over the Hornets on Saturday. He won't be playing in the game against Houston. These would have been unbelievable showcase opportunities for him. Hey, don't forget about me. It's more than just winning Eurobasket with the Slovenian national team. I can do something in the NBA also. EmmaKate, I believe this injury for Goran, this knee injury, couldn't have been worse timed. Because when coaches are voting, they're not looking at the stats. They're not reading the headlines. Goran explodes for 30 versus Hornets. I think this may be the swing vote that lets others like Victor Oladipo, like Kyle Lowry, maybe even like Kemba Walker wind up with one of those backcourt spots instead.
What about Hassan Whiteside? Any chance he gets in?
You know, people have asked me, and it was interesting because on TNT's show last week when they announced the All-Star starters, I believe it was Kenny Smith who had Hassan Whiteside as one of his 7 reserves. Here's my point on that. The numbers are good enough. He's getting stuff done. I know he's not playing a lot of fourth quarters. Played 2 seconds in the fourth quarter against Charlotte. He's missed 18 games. And this is supposed to be voting on All-Stars for this year, not a career body of work. You can make an argument, certainly we can go back and forth, that he's the Heat's best player. I think if you miss 18 games, if you miss that much of a team schedule, about a third of it at the time of the voting, I think that should make you ineligible. And even Hassan, we've heard so many stories over the years, they don't respect me, they don't think about me. Even he's not mentioning it. So I think he's come to that realization that Tuesday at 7 o'clock when they announced All-Star reserves, that he probably won't be in consideration.
Very true. All right, next up, Leonard from Charlotte says the best way to use Justice Winslow is to have him set up plays and have someone else finish them.
And that's fine, and that's all well and good. And it's interesting. With Goran Dragic out right now, Josh Richardson has been starting at point guard, no Tyler Johnson. So they're using Justice as their backup point guard. And he played well in that role. Here's my entire point with Justice Winslow. Is he going to be content to be a defender, to be a standstill three-point shooter? And he's done that well. He's made 10 of his last 12 three-point attempts. You'll take that from anyone. Or did Justice Winslow come into this league as the number 10 draft choice in 2015 out of Duke saying, I want to be a star? That's a tough call to tell someone you're the number 10 pick in the draft, but we want you to be Bruce Bowen or Keith Askins. To me, that's the mental part of it. Justice wants more, EmmaKate, is there more there, though? That's the question.
That is, we'll see. So do the Heat still need to pursue a true backup point guard on the free agent or buyout market?
Yeah, I think they do. I like what Justice has done in this role as an oversized guy, but you could even see points in the game in Charlotte when the team sort of went sideways, when they could use that definitive veteran, I'm going to take control moment, maybe when they had a Bano Udre or someone like that on their team. I would like to see that on the roster. There's enough wiggle room here. A.J. Hammond's contract, he's still in the developmental league. Jordan Mickey, I haven't seen, forever. Maybe he's up in the Magic Kingdom or something, but I haven't seen him anywhere. So I think they have room for it, and I think if you're going to play to win in the playoffs, and if Goran Dragic misses a game in the playoffs, I don't know if you get by against playoff-level point guards going with Tyler Johnson, going with Justice Winslow, going with Josh Richardson. When the game slows down, that's where having an innately skilled point guard really makes a difference.
Mm-hmm. All right, Robert asks, or says, I guess, when Hassan Whiteside is engaged in giving full effort, it's hard to even think about trading him.
And that's the thing. It needs to happen more often. You look at Charlotte and you look at the start of that game and you could see what Hassan Whiteside could do. He was battling evenly with Dwight Howard. He had very good numbers the night before in Brooklyn before the Nets went small and Eric Spoelstra couldn't fit him in. I understand all that, EmmaKate, but it has to be constant. We see the knee brace right here. That is a factor. He said it rubs on his other knee. He doesn't feel like the same player. You know what? That's part of the pro experience. There are going to be injuries. There's going to be adversity. What I still need to see from Hassan Whiteside, and we speak about this almost every week, is this a player, when the going gets rough, he can get tougher. To me, that's what makes you an elite big man. Your knee hurts? Don't want to hear it. You didn't play in the fourth quarter previous game? Don't want to hear it. Show us that you're up to every challenge, not just when the going is good and you're getting the rebounds and you're getting the block shots and you're getting the points. Show us when there's adversity. Where are you then? He sat at the end in Charlotte. He comes back against Houston, big game against Clint Capella. Then he has games against Sacramento and Charlotte again here on Saturday. Show me 48 minutes. He has been a terrific 24-minute player, sometimes a 36-minute player. The game is 48. Give me at least 40. I'll give you 8 minutes off a game.
And that's the thing is, this is the NBA. It's the big time. Shouldn't every player be required to give their maximum effort every night?
And again, you would think it's that simple, but you understand also the travel and what they go through.
Yes,
Take this
course.
trip, their 5-game trip. They've been on the road for more than a week. Chicago, Milwaukee, Brooklyn, Charlotte. So you get to Charlotte, you're almost home. No, you have to go to Houston. The worst part, you come back home for 2 more games, you go back on the road for 4 more games. I understand the NBA adversity. I understand the lack of sleep. I understand the weather and all that. So I tell every player, right, my thought is, okay, 1 out of every 4 games, 1 out of every 5 games you're off. I have no issue with that. But there has to be something more consistent. That's what separates the All-Star. Alonzo Mourning gave every ounce that he had. Dwayne Wade at the meaningful moments was there. We saw Goran Dragic in Eurobasket. When he had to, he did. Still need to see that from Hassan. And you know what? When you're 27 or 28 years old, you can't use the saw of, I'm a young player. You've moved on. You've evolved.
Very true. And we'll get to some more of those questions at the end of the show. But like we've been doing every week, we're taking a look back at the history of the Heat, celebrating their 30th anniversary season. And so this week, we're talking the all-time top 10 trades for the Heat.
Yeah, the trade deadline is coming up on February 8th, so I thought this would be a good time to look back. Matter of fact, it's going to be a 2-part series, so make sure you're back next week. We're going to have the Heat's 10 all-time worst trades. Unless you work for the Heat, then please don't watch, but that's the exception to our group right here. But if we look at the Heat's all-time best trades, go backwards again so I can save some drama there for the end. I start my list here with the Goran Dragic trade. Now, some people might tell me, hey, Ira, they gave up 2 potential lottery picks to the Suns and haven't advanced deep into the playoffs. What I'm telling you is this. With the Heat losing Chris Bosh to his blood clots, with the Heat losing Dwayne Wade as a free agent, he's been the bridge to another era. Those players are essential, that you never get too far down, that even when you missed the playoffs last year, you get to 41 wins. So I have him on my list where others might not. Jason Williams, White Chocolate, what he did with the Heat when he came from the Memphis Grizzlies to win that 2006 NBA championship. Say what you want about the Heat's great point guards. We already ran that list. Tim Hardaway on the top, some others. He was the point guard on the first ever Miami Heat championship team. That was a heck of a trade, and that was the same trade we get to with Antoine Walker. I mean, you bring these 2 players in on a trade. You give up an Eddie Jones. People are going, what is Pat Riley thinking? Well, ultimately, what Pat Riley was thinking with that mega deal that involved Boston, involved Memphis and other teams was those two players at number 9 and 8 on my trade list led to the Heat's first championship. To me, that automatically makes those winning deals.
Well, yeah, and like you mentioned, that the trade for White Chocolate, Jason Williams, bit of a head scratcher. He's the antithesis of a Pat Riley player.
Flashy passes and all that.
But again, Pat Riley knew what he was doing.
And what I remember more than anything was this. They're in Dallas. They're about to win the championship there. They win that game, Game 6. Pat Riley, one tie, one shirt, one suit. He wasn't even telling him to pack for Game 7. Amid all the celebration, Jason Williams walks to the middle of the locker room. And this was as visceral as I can ever remember a player, and just shouts, "Call me a loser now. I'm not a loser anymore." That meant so much to him, to come to the Heat, to win a championship. Forget about the looks, forget about the passes, forget about everything, that he could be a winning player. So to me, that's why when I look back at that Jason Williams trade, you can say, if you can't get the best players in a trade, get the hungriest players. They got that in Antoine Walker. They got that in Jason Williams. So that's why I start my list with those guys. Now we move to sort of a different group, also sort of related when we go to number 7, 6, and 5 on my list. And these are players who in a way were traded and moved for each other. Anthony Mason comes in for one season with the Heat. That's the year Alonzo Mourning goes down with his kidney illness and he's unable to play. Everyone thinks the Heat aren't going to make the playoffs. We mentioned this when we mentioned our power forwards, top 10. Anthony Mason helps lead him to the playoffs. Only one season, but to me, memorable enough that worked. Jamal Mashburn they got from Dallas. This was a point when the Heat were about to get in those great playoff series with the Knicks, and they needed a versatile talent. To me, he's a player before his time. Mashburn's positionalist game would have been perfect for Eric Spoelstra and what he's developed. I think the Heat could have got more for him before he moved on. And Eddie Jones came back to the Heat at a time when they needed, again, like with Goran Dragic, a steadying force, and he would lead them in scoring in so many of those seasons. Still lives down here. Over the weekend was at Ray Allen's poker tournament with Shane Battier. So I always favor the guys who came and who stayed. Of course, he's local, from Pompano Beach, played at Ely High. It was important when he got here for what he meant to this team.
And like, kind of like you mentioned, he got here during some of the leanest times for the Heat, and he, for 5 seasons, stood as a scoring leader when there wasn't much else there.
Yeah, and that's the thing when I look at Eddie Jones is people will say, well, why did Eddie Jones win with the Heat? Well, he was here at the beginning with the Dwayne Wade era, and then he moved on. To be that veteran leader, to come back home, to come back to his community, I think Eddie Jones is the forgotten man. I think when we talk about jerseys being raised to the rafters, well, we already know that Alonzo Mourning and that Tim Hardaway are there. We know that Shaquille O'Neal is there. LeBron James and Dwayne Wade are going there. Don't sleep on Eddie Jones. Don't forget, as we do this 30-year look back at the Miami Heat, that even in the tough times, there still were special people. Eddie Jones, to me, is sort of that quintessential guy who was here when you needed, and it's always a great story when it's a local guy. So now we get to the brass tacks, a little more fascinating here. Names people maybe can relate to, number 4 through number 2. Tim Hardaway, crazy night. The Heat played in Philadelphia. They were playing a game there. We asked Pat Riley, you thinking about making any moves? Pat Riley goes, nah, we're going to stay pretty much intact. I think the next day they traded the entire roster. It's literally, I had to find out what numbers guys were wearing. And even at that point, Tim was in the doghouse with the Warriors. He having real problems with Rick Adelman. And there were some in the Heat who thought, wait, should we give up Bimbo Coles? Then we won't have a point guard if it didn't work out. It worked out fine. Alonzo Mourning. Pat Riley arrives in September, says he's going to change the culture, walks into Heat practice and goes, yeah, these are my players? A month later, some of the best players on the franchise wind up being traded when Matt Geiger and Glenn Rice and Khalid Reeves go to Charlotte. That really started the whole uptick. And of course, Shaquille O'Neal and the big risk. And again, Pat Riley absolutely emptied his entire roster because he said sometimes one player makes a difference. So Brian Grant, Caron Butler, Lamar Odom, all all-star level talents, if not even all-stars, and a first-round pick for Shaquille O'Neal. So again, look at Pat Riley's legacy here. It's the monster trade. It's going all in. If he's at a poker table 3 different times, these 3 examples, he pushed all of his chips to the middle.
Absolutely. And with Hardaway and Mourning, it was that first kind of 1-2 punch for the Heat that really
all in one season.
things.
Again, Alonzo arrives in September, and then Tim Hardaway arrives in February. And it was just a matter, when you looked at what they did with these 2 players, especially with Hardaway, how Pat Riley, matter of fact, the next game after they traded Tim Hardaway, a lot of people forget this, they didn't have enough players to play because the incoming players weren't yet past their physical. The outgoing players had to pass their physicals. The Heat had to sign a player at the day of a game just to get to 8. If you remember in one of our all-time great Heat games, we talked about Rex Chapman making those crazy amount of three-pointers, and with their shorthanded roster, they beat the Bulls. And then it really started. That Tim Hardaway came in and meshed with Alonzo Mourning, and the two of them, no, they didn't win a championship, but I'm not so sure, EmmaKate, that any of the moments for these franchises were as emotional. I'm talking about winning the 2006 championship, 4 straight trips to the finals, LeBron, as those Knicks Heat playoff series. I mean, that's the stuff that you can make 2, 3, 4 30 for 30s on. Just the emotion of those moments. And it was because of Tim Hardaway and what he delivered that really started that process with Alonzo Mourning.
Absolutely. All right. Takes to number 1. Who do you got?
Number 1, I think, this is going to be weird because people are going to go, whoa, that's not a player. Sometimes it's bigger than a player. Pat Riley. If people forget, Pat Riley resigned. Some people say faxed in. He says differently. His resignation as coach of the Knicks. He was out in the ether. Mickey Arison probably a little too publicly said, yeah, we'd like him to be our coach. Problem was, Pat was still under contract to the New York Knicks. So as it went back and forth and the Knicks filed a suit and a complaint with the commissioner of tampering, the Heat finally said, okay, here's $1 million, which back in that day was still worth something, and we'll give you a first round draft choice. EmmaKate, think about how everything would have been different if the Heat didn't make this trade. If at some point the Heat said, we're not giving you a first-round pick, turned into Walter McCarty, we're not going to give you that money, we'll just wait till his extra time is done in New York, we'll wait the process out. Instead, just like we said in the previous trades, within a year, he gets Alonzo Mourning, he gets Tim Hardaway, he makes the Heat starting to be a force in the East. So it's really ironic. In 30 years of the Heat, the greatest trade in franchise history wasn't for a player. It was for an architect.
It's amazing. I mean, a lot of this list wouldn't have happened without Pat Riley.
Yeah, this is the Pat Riley list for the most part here when you look at it anyway, and what he's done and what he's overseen, because the Heat felt he was worth it. So again, in New York, they'll always say the Heat tampered. The Heat will say, we didn't tamper, we made a trade. Makes the top of my Heat trade list, and who knows, maybe by the end of the season I'll do my top tampering list, and it'll be on that as well.
There you go. Yeah, I think it was worth it for him to go through that.
Yeah,
for sure.
First round pick, $1 million. Wasn't my $1 million.
All right. Well, thanks so much for doing that. It's so fun to look back at the history and see everything.
You say that
that's
this week, but when I do the 10 worst trades next week, I'm sure the phone over there will be buzzing.
Yeah, we'll get all kinds of social media comments. All right, let's take some time now to look ahead at the upcoming schedule. So, Ira, what is looking interesting to you on the schedule?
Not a lot of home games, as we know. I mean, it's crazy. Coming off a 5-game trip, they come home for a 2-game homestand, and then they're right back out for a challenging 4-game trip that includes a game to Cleveland. The Sacramento Kings come in, their lone visit of the season to American Airlines Arena. EmmaKate, these are the ones that cannot get away. You look at the Brooklyn game last week, how much better would this current road trip have been if you beat the Nets? You look at the bad loss to the Atlanta Hawks this season, to the Knicks. You can't let the easy one get away. Sacramento's in a fascinating position right now, is that they have decided we can't keep playing our veterans. We're not going anywhere. They have Zach Randolph. They have Vince Carter. They have a bunch of older players on their roster there, Garrett Temple, George Hill, and they've told them, we're not going to play you all in the same game anymore. We have to play our kids. De'Aaron Fox, the guard out of Kentucky. Willie Cauley-Stein, the former number 1 pick out of Kentucky. We have to play these guys. We have to make it work with these guys. So again, Sacramento not playing for winning, probably playing for the lottery again, experimenting with players. The Heat will have 2 days off before this home game. This is one they have to get, not because it's a mega matchup, but you know what? Sometimes the little ones are also the must-wins.
Absolutely. We don't want them looking back a few months kicking themselves because they let one of these games slip away. All right, let's look at a few more questions before we wrap things up. All right. So one of our fans here asks, how is Wayne Ellington not an all-star?
Look, what Wayne has done, and again, you and I go back every week, and we can almost have a segment here, who is the MVP of the Heat at the moment? And I know we've spoken about Josh Richardson, and Goran Dragic has been Player of the Week twice. You could almost make an argument that right now, Wayne Ellington's been the MVP of the season. He's not an all-star, though. That's just not what he is. What he is a player who should be in the three-point shooting contest during All-Star weekend. So I think Wayne will get his nod about a week from now. I know he doesn't have among the most makes. I know he doesn't have among the highest percentage. But if we were to go through the league of biggest impact three-point shooters, and I know this sounds crazy, I don't know if there's a more impactful three-point shooter this season beyond Steph Curry than Wayne Ellington. You can make an argument for Klay Thompson, for James Harden and what some of the Houston guys are doing, but Wayne's been that effective. If he's not in the three-point shootout during All-Star Weekend, that's a crime against the Heat.
I agree. All right, someone says, and this is going back to your top 10 list we just chatted about, Chris Bosh trade was big. Would that fit anywhere?
You know, it was, but it's almost EmmaKate to me, and I'm going to get to this next week, one of my worst trades for this reason also. Again, people consider it more of a free agent signing because they were in free agency. However, the Heat had to trade a first-round pick back to Toronto because they wanted to give Chris Bosh the extra year, a year he never played, unfortunately, because of the blood clots. Plus, remember, the Heat gave 2 first-round picks to do a sign and trade for LeBron James. One of those picks came for the Cavaliers after LeBron went back. So to me, yes, you could say they both were trades. They both should be on there. I'll address that at our all-time greatest free agent signings. But I think there was also more of a cost than maybe the Heat anticipated to get extra seasons for those players, seasons that those players never wound up playing for the Miami Heat.
Definitely. All right. How about James Johnson is even doubting himself? You can tell. He's missing dunks. He's better off the bench against second units.
And you know what? I know when this question, came in and people were talking about the Heat struggling and James Johnson. Charlotte game's a perfect example. He was not very good in the first half of that game. And then all of a sudden, he had his moment where he realized Eric Spoelstra's drawing up a play, Wayne Ellington's the decoy, I have to dunk this ball. And he did. And then all of a sudden, Josh Richardson came up with the steal, gave it back to James. He made the three-pointer that he had to. But I agree. I think James Johnson is wonderful off the bench because his energy, or he'll just beat you up, as we've spoken about a week ago, one of the two. Here's the problem with this team. They might have more players who are good off the bench. Think about what Kelly Olynyk did with 14 points in the fourth quarter against Charlotte. Think about how we talked at the top of the show, would rather not start Wayne Ellington because he's been so effective off the bench. Until this year, they didn't want to start Tyler Johnson. It's almost like the Heat would like to start 3 players and bring 8 guys off the bench at once. They have really good reserves. James Johnson is better as a reserve, but so are 5 or 6 of his teammates. You have to throw 5 out there. They have this rule for some reason. And I think that's why you're seeing James Johnson in the starting lineup, because the Heat also wants to build a rotation more than necessarily worry about the starting 5. It's the finishing 5 that matters.
Definitely. And with all these injuries, some of these guys are
out of whack and out of shape. Yeah, out of position.
May not want to. All right. Sippy says, is there another G League player that has had the responsibility as Derrick Jones Jr.? He's done everything asked of him except play in the fourth quarter where veteranship counts. But being there in the fourth quarter means growth also.
Well, just because someone named Sippy asked a question, we got to address this anyway.
Oh, of course.
Thank you, Sippy. It's crazy. We spoke about this, about the starting lineup against Houston, what it'll probably be, and the fact that Derrick Jones Jr. is on a 2-way contract. I think he has like 10 NBA days left. You could play up to 45 days in the NBA on a 2-way contract, and he's starting in big games, producing big moments. It talks about the state of the Heat's injuries, and what's interesting, EmmaKate, is this. When Tyler Johnson comes back, when Goran Dragic is healthy, when Rodney Magruder comes back, Derrick Jones can be this guy who has helped the Heat get to a certain point and then might wind up finishing his season in the G League with the Sioux Falls Skyforce because he's out of NBA time. A lot of times, the road to success is paved by these little performances that by the time we get to March and April, we'll forget about. But really, you talk about a guy whose time is now. For Derrick Jones, very much this is his time.
All right. Anders from Chilliwack, British Columbia, Canada, I think.
Oh, we have big Canadian following, yeah.
Love it.
The time zone is tough sometimes.
Come on, Canadians, we want more of your
Keep those
questions.
cards and letters coming.
Should Miami consider Ramon Sessions for some insurance at point guard? His assist-to-turnover ratio is not great.
No, but again, I understand the thrust of the question there, and we spoke about this, having another true point guard. It's funny. For years, I've written in Ask Ira at sunsentinel.com about having a third point guard because I believe it's that important. And Pat Riley would start some of his media sessions and go, Ira, we're not doing it. Drop the subject. This season, they don't have a true second NBA veteran point guard. They have players who can play it. They've been forced to play Derek Walton, who I still think is a little while away in his 2-way contract. Again, February 8th, we'll have a better idea where this roster stands. That's the trading deadline. But keep in mind, Dion Waiters undergoing a surgery as we speak right now. We couldn't get the live camera into the surgical suite, so we apologize for that. We tried. There's all kinds of HIPAA laws and things like that. So we know they're going to get a salary cap exception for him of $5.5 million. Players who are waived by March 1st are eligible for other teams' playoff rosters. To me, there will be some veteran point guards who are in teams, some of the teams we showed, the lottery teams earlier, who are going nowhere, who are going to go to their teams, give me a buyout, give me some of my cash, I want to go somewhere. Then the Heat will have that $5.5 million they can spend on a player. Keep an eye on March 1st. I think there's a chance the Heat, as they've done before with players like Mike Bibby and other point guards, might wind up bringing in a point guard then, veteran.
We have a trade question for you. Ira, do you think Miami should trade for Kemba Walker, and do they have the assets to?
You know, it's interesting. I mentioned this in a story, my Sunday column, and also in Ask Ira. They don't have the first-round draft choice that Charlotte wants because they've spent so many first-round picks. We spoke about the Goran Dragic trade. The first-round pick that he can trade would be 2023. I don't know if Charlotte wants to wait 5 years to exercise a pick.
Yeah.
What they want is salary cap relief, take some of our bad contracts. I didn't even realize Marvin Williams was on the court the other day. He was so bad. Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, another forward who can't shoot. We're learning there's no place for players like that. This is the trade I came up with. I don't know if Charlotte would do it. It works mathematically. I think it's something at least you can get them to consider. And that would be a trade of Justice Winslow, Bam Adebayo, and Wayne Ellington. Now, before you, EmmaKate, like you do after the shows, tell me I'm out of my mind.
Always.
Wayne Ellington is going to be a free agent in the offseason. I think because of the luxury tax, it's going to be very hard to keep him. He might walk anyway. If you believe that Justice Winslow is an uneven talent, well, by next October, you have to decide, are we signing him to an extension or are we letting him go after one more year? So it really comes down in that equation to this. Would you trade Bam Adebayo for Kemba Walker? I think Kemba Walker is a now player. I think Bam Adebayo is a later player, and the Heat have always lived in the moment. That's the trade I put together, and it's really interesting because when I mentioned it, my mentions blew up. People love this current Heat team. Remember, folks, though, you also loved last season's team, which finished 41-41, and everyone in the offseason, they've got to re-sign Dion Waiters. They've got to re-sign James Johnson. They've got to bring the group intact. The same people who were emailing after they got 4 games under 500 were uneven at the start. They need more. The question is this. Is Pat Riley, as we said at the top of the show, playing for 4th place? Is he playing just to win for one playoff series? Or does he go all in? So as long as a name like Kemba Walker is out there, and it was floated by ESPN and other places last week, then I think it at least behooves the Heat to say, how can we not damage our future, but still make a pitch? That's the kind of trade I foresee them looking at.
All right, and like you said, it is a pretty fun team to watch. We'll have to see. And Aaron thinks so too. He said, I am excited about the Heat. How far do you think they can go?
Yeah,
it's early. It's
I
early,
hope there's
but
one more question because I don't want to end the show on a
no, we got one more
note.
after.
Okay, good.
One more.
Look, I think this Heat team right now can compete for that number 4 seed. Like I said at the top, I don't think they catch Cleveland or Toronto or Boston. Maybe I'm wrong. You get to number 4, you have a good chance, home court in the first round, winning a first-round series. Probably going to play Washington the way it sets up right now. I think you're fine there. Washington doesn't know who they are, what they are, if they're going to break up the team or maybe go to another coach beyond Scott Brooks. Okay. Second round, you have to either then play Toronto or Cleveland or Boston on their terms, on their court. I don't see it right now. God bless these kids. I spoke to a scout. I mentioned it in my Sunday column at sunsentinel.com. And he said this. Yes, the Heat can win a first-round series. He surprised them. The Heat can compete in a second-round series. So EmmaKate, it comes down to the entire premise of this. What is Pat Riley competing for? Is he competing for a rah-rah, we've had a wonderful season, this second round 2 years ago, 2016, it was a really fun run to Game 7 against Toronto? Or is he still, Pat Riley, there is winning a championship or there is misery? Maybe he's changing. Maybe it's time for Heat fans to change also.
We'll have to see. All right, one more question for you.
Please be upbeat.
I think this is a good one. Casey from Tampa says, this team has developed a great rhythm with Kelly Olynyk.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, again, early in the season, why did they sign this guy? $50 million. They made a mistake. They have Bam. They have Hassan. They have James Johnson. They have so many big guys because he is unique. He is like nothing I have ever seen. I have never seen an NBA player play in slow motion and succeed like he does. It's like the whole court just stops. Those up and under moves he has where he literally waits for the whole world to move beside and then he scores, and you saw that in the Charlotte game. Eric Spoelstra said, we need to change this up. We need something different. From Hassan's power, from Bam's power, he brings in Olynyk at the start of the fourth quarter, three-pointer, boom. 10-point game within 7. Three-pointer, boom. 7-point game within 4. Competitive at the end. He misses that first free throw for the drama at the end, and then he makes number 2. First time in his career he has ever scored the winning point in the last minute of overtime or regulation, so he has it. This whole group, there are so many players that you could look at and just say how they're a lovable bunch of guys. How James Johnson and his feistiness, the fight in Toronto, Kelly Olynyk, the fourth quarter, Bam Adebayo's relentless energy, Wayne Ellington's constant motion for threes, Goran Dragic just driving into traffic, Tyler Johnson at this very moment probably losing another tooth. That's what this team has become. I think nationally people want to see stars, so they're sort of turning another way. But when you watch this team down here, I think this team is an embraceable team.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've definitely embraced him here. Ira, again, thank you so much for coming in to talk. It's always fun. Always so much going on with this team. You never know what's going to happen.
Well, we'll be back next week from somewhere once we plot out that schedule. The Heat, after this week's games against Sacramento and Charlotte, they go off to play Dallas and Cleveland and Philadelphia and Detroit. Somewhere back on the road, we'll hook up with you guys, but it's getting really interesting, and as that February 8th trading deadline gets closer, I think we'll have a real sense of what and who this team is going to be.
Absolutely, and also where Pat Riley's head at. If they're a win now, or just
that'll give us a real good window.
Yeah. All right, and the Heat are in Houston tonight, and then as always, stay tuned to SunSentinel.com for all of Ira's wonderful coverage of the team. He's the best. Thanks so much for joining us, and we will see you again next week.